But Robert, now speaking of the federal government exceeding its potential authority, let's get to the eviction moratorium because people are asking a lot of questions. Okay, hold on. What happened? Recently, the CDC now has extended the moratorium on evictions until I think it's the end of October. And for the life of me, it's not because I don't want to understand it. I don't understand how they're doing it, given the decision that we just discussed from SCOTUS. What was it? A month ago at most, where SCOTUS basically said this is beyond the authority of the CDC. They cannot unilaterally, they're a freaking government commission. They don't have the power to legislate. If they wanted to provide a moratorium on eviction, it had to go through Congress. So invalid, you don't have the authority, send it to Congress. Congress passes a law, and if it passes as law, then it's no longer a question of the CDC doing it. It has passed the legislative process. From what I understand, this went back to the Biden government. And they said it didn't go through Congress. They just passed the buck back to the CDC. And the CDC just said, we are suspending or we are putting a moratorium on evictions for 2 more months, because in high coronavirus or high COVID contagion areas. I don't know how they determine that. We'll get to that maybe. How and why? How? I mean, how does it happen? It seems that it's on its face just a violation of the Supreme Court decision that came out 2 months ago. The Biden administration or the government, I don't want to blame Biden, I'll just blame Congress, are not assuming their responsibility to either make the law or not make the law. They send it back to the CDC. CDC exceeds its authority and it'll get overturned in 2 months, but the damage is done. What have I misunderstood?
No, that's basically it. The only thing is that the Supreme Court decision was not a binding decision because Kavanaugh wouldn't make it so. So what happened was it came up on an emergency injunction relief to sustain the injunction and lift the stay on the injunction that the lower courts had already issued. Multiple courts have looked at this, and almost every court that looked at it said this is clearly outside of the CDC's authority. The CDC is taking this just like emergency use authorization, taking what's supposed to be real limited, deal with a bioweapon outbreak in a particular town where you got to rush something in because it's their only chance. And you don't worry about it being mandated because informed consent is required, and your assumption is everybody's dying or suffering from severe disease and will take any remedy at the time. And now it's all of a sudden become this massive loophole that swallowed the entire process for approving drugs in America. That was intended to solve, in particular, the problem of rushed vaccines in particular. Going back, Belgian Congo in the late 1950s, reporters and journalists have looked at this, have tied that to the later AIDS outbreak, was an attempt to rush a polio vaccine there. And then, of course, famously in the United States in 1976, we rushed a swine flu vaccine out there. Jerry Ford was using it to try to get reelected. And instead, it caused more damage than benefit. And so all of these rules were designed to stop that from happening again. And we're supposed to have killed off with the Nuremberg Code and everything else, killed off the eugenics era legal precedents, and they're coming right back, roaring back again. In that same capacity, they've taken something that was supposed to be the CDC's approval authority to quarantine and fumigate buildings into we can just be everybody's landlord. And so it never made sense legally.
But it's beyond that. It's that the CDC is, there's no better word for it. They are misappropriating or they are appropriating private property. And they're telling landlords what they can and cannot do with their property under the pretext that somehow evicting tenants who don't pay. I mean, that somehow there's a direct correlation between eviction and spreading of the virus. I mean, first of all, do we know what the criteria is for the areas in which there's high communication of COVID? Like, is there any threshold, any objective metric for that? Or is it just willy-nilly?
There is, or at least is going to be, but that's probably going to stay a flexible number, and it's probably going to be very broad, like their emergency use authorization in the first place. The emergency use authorization only supposed to last a certain time period, supposed to end when the risk is down or known information is present, and yet it doesn't. It just keeps going, like a bad Energizer bunny. And so the reason why they're able to get away with it at all is because Kavanaugh, the 4 justices said this is clearly unconstitutional. Justice Roberts, sadly, was on the opposite side, apparently, which is just shows what a joke he is. The big Commerce Clause judge is going to restrict federal government control over things. Yeah. How'd that turn out, folks? Another Federalist Society champion. Just like the 7th Circuit judge, who was the chief judge who issued the opinion on the Indiana University case, where he said getting a mandatory vaccine is just like having to pay tuition or have to do a history assignment. I mean, what a preposterous claim. But he's loved by the Federalist Society. He's their number one favorite judge in America. That's what people wonder why I rant against him. People like Easterbrook. I've won many cases in front of him, but I'm not a fan. For many good reasons. But the CDC basically, because Kavanaugh said, well, I won't lift the stay on the injunction because it's just about to end anyway. I agree it's clearly not legal what they're doing. So he was the fifth vote. And so even though it was clear where they were going, what did they do? They're like, that nitwit Kavanaugh gave us another life, so we'll just file it again, knowing that it may take weeks or months. In fact, even Biden said that. Said, yeah, maybe it's unconstitutional, but it'll probably be 2 months before they get around to ruling on it. So, I mean, it made Kavanaugh look like a joke. And we'll see if he takes any remedial action now. But, I mean, by the way, the FDA and the CDC are infamous for this. Years ago, the FDA said they're suing to stop us from issuing this new drug. They have no evidence we're about to issue it. And the judge is like, you're absolutely right. No standing. This case isn't ripe. The very next day, the FDA approved the drug. That's who they are. So it's sad. It will definitely. The good news is they've given the opportunity to make sure this never comes back again, because now the Supreme Court will have maximum pressure to make it clear that the authority to quarantine or fumigate is not the authority to steal every landlord's property in the United States of America.
And just so people appreciate now, landlords in the United States, some of them, it's not by no means all of them, but some of the ones who are governed by this have not been paid rent in, is it 12 months or 10 months or virtually a year?
Yeah, exactly. And finally, Fox did something useful, had some people on to show that most your big institutional landlords aren't that impacted by this because of various, bailouts and protection and other things. The people that are most impacted by this are your small landlords, your people that only have one other home, or your people that, maybe they have 5 little properties and it's their entire livelihood. And these people are watching the person not pay rent and then go buy a boat with their stimulus money or whatever else when they're out on the lake. Say, hey, how you doing, George?
I know, and so people also appreciate this. So let's just say it's been a year. We'll round it up or round it down, whatever. A year, some landlords have not been getting paid rent. The tenants, this is not rent free. The tenants are going to owe this back rent, right, at some point in time with interest and whatever. So this is creating a situation where you are suffocating the landlords in real time because they have to carry the cost of this property, the cost of the mortgage, maintenance, utilities, whatever. And then you're going to crush them in real time. But in theory, these tenants are still going to owe a year's worth of back rent, which they're never going to have, because Lord knows you give someone a check, and this is no judgment. They don't save the money that is the check that they're receiving. That check is gone pretty much as soon as you got it on current needs and capricious desires.
It reminds me of a prank call that was done on a talk radio station in LA not long after Obamacare, where people would call up local health clinics and say, hey, Obamacare just passed. I'm going to be coming in. All the health care is free now. And they're like, no, you still get. And they're like, no, I saw Obama. It's all free. And it's basically people have been under the illusion of free rent and free checks for no work. And what's going to happen? It's sooner or later, the piper's going to be coming due. Now, some portion of them will never be able to pay it back, so the landlords will get stiff permanently. Others, others will be saddled with debt they can't repay, or to the degree they can repay, is going to be very punitive for them. So all we're doing is postponing something that needs to come to consequence sooner rather than later to resolve it without long-term institutional harm.